Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm DK, and I'm so glad you're here. We're going to explore an exciting and practical topic of high school educators: how to use English as a medium of instruction, that is EMI, within a content and language integrated learning, that is CLIL framework. If you are working with ESL students and trying to teach subject content while helping them improve their English, this approach might be exactly what you need. Today I'll cover, firstly, what EMI and CLIL are and why they work so well together. Further, how to integrate listening, speaking, reading and writing into your lessons. Ways to support students at different language levels in one classroom. Some real-life examples of lesson you can try out. And also we'll look at some challenges and benefits of using this method. And finally, I have a special guest, teacher of biology that has experienced EMI in a CLIL context. Grab a coffee or settle in wherever you are, and let's jump right in. To kick things off, let's talk about the basics. EMI, or English as a medium of instruction, means teaching academic subjects like history, biology, or geography entirely in English. CLIL, or content and language integrated learning, takes it a step further by combining content learning with language development. For high school students learning English as a second language, this is a win-win. They're getting subject knowledge and practicing English in real-world contexts at the same time. It's not about separating language lessons from other subjects, but blending them together so students are learning in a natural, meaningful way. What I love about this approach is how well it prepares students for the future, whether it's higher education or a global career. But let's be honest, it also takes planning and creativity. That's where the rest of this episode comes in. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do we weave listening, speaking, reading and writing into subject lessons? Picture this. You are teaching a science lesson about the water cycle. You can start by showing a short video in English with subtitles or playing a simple, clear audio explanation. To support your students, provide visuals like diagrams and charts. Afterwards, ask them to complete a matching activity or answer a few questions to check their understanding. For speaking, group work is your best friend. Let's say you are teaching history. Have students reenact debate between historical figures or create a group presentation on a key event. They will practice speaking without feeling too much pressure, and they will engage deeply with the content. Reading activities can be super flexible. For a geography lesson on climate change, for instance, give students an article from a news site or textbook. For lower level students, include a glossary of difficult words. For higher level students, assign a task like summarizing the article or pulling out the key arguments. Finally, writing tasks. These can be as simple as labeling diagrams in biology or as complex as writing a persuasive essay in a social studies class. Provide sentence starters or graphic organizers to make it easier for students who are still building their skills. Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest challenges in high school ESL classrooms: mixed ability students. Every teacher knows that not all students come in at the same level, so differentiation is the main aspect. For example, in a history class on ancient civilizations, beginner students might work on a timeline of key events, while advanced students write a paragraph analyzing cultural trends. Or, for instance, in a science lesson, you could provide beginners with a partially filled-in lab report template, while advanced students complete it independently. And finally, mix things up. For some tasks, teachers can group students by ability so they can work at their own pace. For others, mix abilities so students can learn from each other. For instance, in a geography class about urbanization, for example, one group could focus on research and another on creating visuals for a class presentation. The next topic for discussion had to be challenges and benefits, but I have decided that there is nothing better than hearing firsthand about the challenges and benefits of this approach by a person who has experienced it. I'm pleased to introduce you our special guest of today's podcast. Welcome, Ersultan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive in, could you tell our listeners a bit about your teaching experience?
Of course. Thank you for having me. I've been teaching high school biology for 15 years, and most of my students are ESL learners. I've been using EMI and CLIL framework for a while now, and I found it to be an incredibly effective way to engage students in both content and language learning.
That's amazing. Can you explain how teaching biology and English benefits your ESL students?
Sure. Biology is such a great subject for this because it's so visual and hands-on. By learning biology in English, students are exposed to academic vocabulary. They can use it in other subjects, and they practice critical thinking and problem solving in a second language. It's challenging, but it's also really rewarding when they start making connections.
Absolutely. The dual focus on content and language is such a strength of this approach. Let's move on to some practical tips for integrating language skills into lessons. So let's talk about the 4 essential language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing, of course. Ersultan, how do you incorporate these skills into your biology lessons?
I'll break it down. Firstly, listening. I often start a lesson with a short video or narrated animation of a biological process like photosynthesis. Students listen and then answer a few comprehension questions. I also pause the video to explain key points or ask students to predict what comes next. Further, speaking. For speaking, I love using group discussions or pair work. For example, after learning about ecosystem, students might work in pairs to create a food web and then explain it to the class. About reading. Biology is full of diagrams and charts, so I use this a lot. I'll give students a short reading passage, say on the structure of DNA, and pair it with a labeled diagram to help them connect the concepts. Finally, writing. For writing, I use lab reports and reflection journals. After practical activity like dissecting a flower, students write about their observations. Beginners might use sentence starters, while advanced students write full paragraphs.
Those are such great examples. I love how interactive and hands-on your approach is. It really shows how language and content can work together. But high school classrooms often have a wide range of English proficiency levels. How do you support all your students, from beginners to advanced learners in the same class?
Differentiation is key. Here's what I do. Tiered activities. I design tasks at different levels. For example, when we study cell division, beginners might label a diagram of the cell cycle, while advanced students describe each phase in detail. Scaffolding. I provide a lot of visual aids, like flowcharts or labeled diagrams. For writing tasks, I might give beginners sentence starters or templates, while advanced students get more open-ended prompts. And finally, flexible grouping. Sometimes I group students by ability so they can work at their own pace. Other times, I mix abilities so advanced students can help beginners. This peer support is really powerful.
That's fantastic. I especially love the idea of using visuals and templates to scaffold learning. It makes the content so much more accessible. And now, can you share an example of a lesson that worked specifically well in your classroom?
Of course, one of my favorites was a lesson on the human respiratory system. I started with a short video showing how the lungs work, pausing to explain key terms. Then, students worked in small groups to create a 3D model of the respiratory system using craft supplies. Beginners focused on labeling the parts, while advanced students wrote a short paragraph explaining how oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. At the end, each group presented their model to the class. The advanced students explained the process while beginners described the parts. It was a great mix of a language practice and hands-on learning.
That sounds amazing. It's such a creative way to make the content engaging and accessible for everyone. Let's wrap up by talking about the challenges and benefits of using EMI and CLIL. What challenges have you faced, and how have you overcome them?
The biggest challenge is the initial language barrier. Students often feel overwhelmed at first, especially with the scientific terms. To overcome this, I focus on breaking things down into smaller steps and using visuals and examples. The benefits, though, are incredible. Students gain confidence not just in their English, but also in their ability to tackle academic subjects. They also develop skills they can use in university or future careers. It's really rewarding to see how far they come.
Absolutely. It's so inspiring to hear about your work. Thank you for sharing your insights. That's it for today's episode. I hope you find these strategies and examples useful. If you're already using EMI and CLIL in your classroom or thinking about starting, I'd love to hear about your thoughts and experiences. Reach out to me and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.